Well, let me ask you just a little bit more about that. I mean, I saw the episode with Representative Grimm, and you sort of got him, past the point where he was kind of standing in the daylight and unable to hang on to denial. But he did manage to hang on to, we can't really do anything about it. Right. What's your sense of, I mean, getting over denial is obviously an important point, but if that's as far as we get and the Antarctic ice sheet is breaking up in front of us, I think there's some meaningful danger that we go from denial to despair without stopping at climate solutions. Right. What are you seeing out there in terms of willingness to take that next step?
I think that what we're talking about, and I want to ask the governor about this, a point where, I mean, to me it seems as if we're sort of where civil rights was in 1957. I mean, there's clearly increasing traction on this issue, but there are still key constituencies that are not fully engaged in this, and with a number of notable exceptions, some of whom are in this room, the corporate sector, the non-fossil fuel corporate sector, has been pretty passive in terms of lobbying on this issue, in terms of pressing it, about making it a high priority. I'd be curious to know, going back to your experience in Washington, when there was a lot of lobbying on this point, why it's so hard to get a non-fossil fuel lobbyist or executive or CEO to engage on this issue. And I guess this corollary question is, if you were managing a campaign to get non-fossil fuel corporations more aggressively engaged in this issue, what would you do?
It's not a hypothetical question, right?
Well,
There's a lot of them in this room.
Right. Hardly. Well, we are engaging the commercial sector right now. So we have Vulcan chairing our task force on climate change legislation. So we have people, we have Puget Sound Energy. We have some progressive leadership in our utilities here who are helping us fashion a response. We have the timber industry, actually. We have representatives here who understand the consequences for our timber industry if we do not find a solution. So in our state, we are finding some progressive leadership in the corporate sector to help us move forward. But I will say, in a movement like this is, and that's what this has to be, I don't think you can ultimately look to the corporate boardroom for the sort of energy to make this happen. The person who wouldn't, get out of her seat back in those days was Rosa Parks, not a vice president of a major Fortune 500 company. And so I think that this is something that by necessity kind of have to be driven by kind of just everybody individually. And I also want to say too is that we want to work together. I'm very open to solutions here, and I've had a very embracing approach. We had our clue process in the legislature. I asked both parties to give us ideas about that. I'm still going to ask both parties to give us ideas about this. But I have learned sometimes in a struggle, and this is a struggle, sometimes you can't convince people, you just have to defeat them. And that means we need to defeat some of the deniers, and we have to look at that to accomplish this.
But to carry the civil rights analogy a little bit further, as I recall back in the early 60s, Kennedy would have meetings, would call in the 100 top retailers in the country, right, and say civil rights has got to happen, it's got to happen now. So there really is a role for presidential leadership and political leadership to put it on the line to big corporations. That
Very much so. And the thing is, we've got such good news in our state. So let me just run you the last couple of weeks. Last week I was in Moses Lake, Washington, where SGL Company is having a very rapid expansion of their company. And they build a carbon fiber for the BMW all-electric i3 and now i8 all-electric car. And they are able to have such extended mileage because carbon, as you know, is like twice or more stronger than steel and half the weight. So where is the largest carbon fiber manufacturer that allows us to have clean fuels in the world today? It's in Moses Lake, Washington. And where is the largest manufacturer of silicon substrate for solar panels? It's in Moses Lake, Washington. Now, Moses Lake, Washington is starting to understand that they are a hub of job creation associated with climate change. And it's interesting, when I was talking to some of the people there, there were some light bulbs going off. When we were at this ribbon cutting, actually they had not stopped to think about that. So I think those kind of stories are the ones that are going to enable us to really put this over the hump. And it's happening big time in my state. Last week we had actually the world's leading manufacturer and designer of offshore wind turbines, of floating offshore wind turbines. We have enormous wind resources off our Pacific coast. Is where it's Bellevue, Washington, a little company called Principal Power. And I wrote about this woman named Alla Weinstein in this little book years ago, and now she's the world's leader in offshore wind turbines. So we can tell a story of, the Reverend Patton had such an eloquent statement of what we have as a moral obligation. But we have a compelling story that the best job creation strategy in America today is clean energy. And clean energy, in the last 5 years, clean energy jobs have grown twice as fast as any other sector in the United States. That's something a story we got to tell.
So if you were to have a completely confidential, off-the-record, private conversation with President Obama,
if it wasn't for the NSA, we could do that. Actually.
what would you ask him to do that he's not doing?
Well, I had that conversation. He was here.
Off the record, confidential.
Well, he was here to help the families of the slide that happened in the Stillaguamish Valley. And by the way, he was so good. The families were so appreciative of his compassion in this thing. It was really amazing. But basically, I told him is, keep doing what you're doing. That's what I would tell him. Because he's going to come out with the single biggest step of any leader in American history in the next several weeks when he deals with coal pollution. And he takes executive action, which is not only, I would argue, allowed, but required by the Clean Air Act. And when he does that, he has to be soundly and repeatedly praised for showing real leadership on this issue. And I hope that we will all do that, because it's going to take some moral gumption for him to do it. So that's what I would say.